are returning to schools, virtual or actual school buildings this fall, with an unmeasured amount of learning loss. So what aspects of collecting artifacts of learning and student assessment are schools working on to gather the data needed to make data-driven and informed decisions for students in instruction, right? So like, how are we collecting the data? How are we assessing the learning loss?
Great question. Well, I can say one thing just from a framework perspective. This was the goal of my supervisor was, if you think about the school year, you have 4 quarters, right? And at the end of the fourth quarter, the students should end land everything that you were supposed to give towards the fourth quarter. We really can't. I'm not going to say that we can't say that the students didn't or it wasn't sticky, but we didn't have a lot of face-to-face instruction, and we didn't provide a lot of assessment. So we really don't know where the students end up. But if we had to make a judgment, we could say they ended off on the third quarter. I do know there are conversations about getting rid of district benchmarks, but also using other measures of assessment to monitor the progress. Now, I'm in a different network that has a slightly different model. So we have an increased amount of assessments than some of the other networks. But I would just question some of the validity of the assessments that we would do, and also just ensuring that this is really given an accurate narrative of what the students actually can do.
From a teacher's perspective, Diane, what are your thoughts on authentically assessing your students?
Yeah, it's a really impactful question. And even though standardized testing didn't count for this school year, it would be very fascinating if our Department of Education had released that test, because it would be really fascinating to see if students actually thrived off of the remote learning experience, as well as how much of that content was retained. And as a teacher, I feel as though, just like students come from all different backgrounds, this remote learning experience is going to be different from everybody. And so I kind of don't really care about the past. I kind of just care about what happens for these new sets of students who I'll meet in the fall. And whether that's going to be remotely or in the classroom, I would think that qualitative data is going to be more influential than the quantitative data. So whereas I might give some sort of benchmark examination on standards, I really feel as though it should be a journal prompt or a class meeting, kind of just that open discussion where it's the primary source of the students and even the teachers and administrators sharing their perspective, and then kind of cultivating that to figure out, okay, here's where I think we can move forward, because it was either a common talking point or an apparent flaw that's going to be fundamental to carrying them through the next school year.
I'm going to be at a new school, so I'll definitely be reaching out to the previous teachers. Even like the first couple months of school, you kind of have an idea on what level a student is on based on their writing, their reading. So it'll be a lot of peer assessment and give me an idea of what I need to work on. And also make me work a little bit harder, maybe set my game up a little bit. So I'm ready for the challenge.
There are a few online assessment databases that we use and collect data to assess where students are initially. We start that out in the beginning of the school year. And I like to be able to do that both in literacy and in math initially. But I think that before I even get to that, I want to make sure that, as we talked about relationship building and knowing the circumstances around our students, just making sure that we are fully aware, we collect all the information and data we could possibly gather on each individual's situation that might be impeding, their full participation. If we're talking about going virtually, we want to make sure that we have a handle on everything, so we don't, so that surprise around the corner, that we're ready for. There were a number of students, and I can go in situations where I have a young lady whose mother and father, for example, put her out the house because she was pregnant, and so she didn't have access to participate in the springtime. One of my students was shot on May 29th. Like, these things just happen to come up, and so it's imperative for us as a team to ensure that we're assessing what's happening with our kids first and foremost, so we have an idea of what circumstances they're in. Once we're able to do that, then we can go ahead and take a look at looking at those literacy and those mathematic databases to assess where our students are currently, so we know how to plan around the results of those assessments. And like the previous speakers spoke about, utilizing writing samples as well. to collect and see where students are, using prompts to see, where they are in their writing, and figure out how we're going to collectively come together, take a look at all this data and these student samples, and figure out how we're going to plan our lessons accordingly.
One thing that we did before the school year ended was we asked teachers to make a list of the skills that they did not get to before school ended. So they shared that with the next grade's teacher. So our thought is that teachers would, for instance, the 5th grade teacher would go back and teach the first couple of weeks of school what they missed in 4th grade, and then be able to assess them there, and then determine, like, this is to Mary's point of determining what's essential and what is it that they need to be successful in the 5th grade. So using those 4th grade skills that we think is really essential, that would help bridge the gap for the 5th grade skills, and then they can take it from there. So that's our thinking around trying to mesh the 2 years together, and taking the time to do that. And not just giving kids a paper and pencil test the first 2 weeks of school, because that we're not going to get valid results, so we're going to give them the time to get adjusted to school, whatever that may look like, go back and review the skills that they've missed with the teacher, and then consider assessing them.
I mean, as far as assessment goes, the tech side of me, right, thinks tools. And so, part of the conversation, if we're going to be remote and thinking about writing samples and thinking about analyzing that data, is thinking about how can we, if we're not in the classroom, how do you collect that in a way that's not overwhelming to look through? And how do you leverage the technology to be able to do that? And then, to a lot of the points have been made, the access issue, or even just like the problem with digital too, is the kid a bad writer, or they just not know how to type, right? And so, you have those problems too of digital literacy that impede on remote assessments, right? And so, there's just some barriers there around assessing when you're not physically in the school. I mean, maybe it's they take a picture of it, right, and they upload it. I don't know, but just thinking about how we collect those on a technology way. That's where my brain goes. And, as far as adjusting the kinds of assessments we give too, as far as, if we're giving, there's a big conversation right now about, we need like lockdown browser, right? Because kids are going to cheat on the quizzes. So as far as, is that the wrong kind of assessment, right? Maybe giving a quiz isn't the right kind of assessment. If it's going to be that easy for them to Google the answers, then is that really going to achieve what that's a larger conversation about assessments and quizzes and tests in general. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of the technology piece that I think of.
Remember, we're your partners in education, EduConfident, and CTI Tech Services.